Welcome back to the progression of everything. Today we're going to talk a little bit about freestyle. Very important, right? So before we get into the videos, we'll just break things down a little bit. To me, the most important thing in freestyle is head position, which is really going to be based off where your head is in a normal streamline. So when you push off on the wall in a normal streamline, that head position should be the exact same head position you hold during a freestyle stroke. So we'll show that in the videos. After that, we'll focus on keeping the arms in a streamlined position. So even during the swimming phase of freestyle, we want to bring our arms right next to our head, extending out in front of us in the same line and same plane as if the arm itself was in a streamlined position. And just because you're streamlining with one arm at a time doesn't mean it's not streamlined. So if we can build our stroke on a foundation of that streamlined position, I think we'll be setting up the kids for a long and prosperous swimming career. The next part is going to be high elbow recovery. And this isn't necessarily for the recovery part of it. What I mean is, a lot of people will recover with straight arms, bent arms. That's not really why that matters. What happens in the air is not nearly as important as what happens underwater. The reason we want kids to have high elbows is because it forces them to stay in line and not swing their arm out to the side. So it's really more of a body position and rotation drill rather than a recovery thing, but it's easier to understand if we talk about it in terms of recovery. And then the last thing will just be the full stroke. And in freestyle, especially at a young age when you're starting out, distance per stroke is king. Everything should revolve around distance per stroke. The tempo, sprint, freestyle, all of these things are things you work on as they get older and they become more conditioned, and after their stroke is kind of set in stone, then you work on getting them in good shape. But when we're just starting out, we want them to be efficient in the water. So here's the first drill of the freestyle progression, and it's simply just a streamline kick. And the reason we start here is because really all the strokes we want to build them off this streamlined position. So even in freestyle, for instance, you swim and your arms come in at least one at a time. They come into that streamline. Breaststroke comes to a streamline, butterfly to a streamline. So as much as we can, we want to teach strokes to be built just as a extension of the streamlined position, because we all know streamlining is the most hydrodynamic way to move through the water. And if we can teach the kids to cut through the water from an early age really well, then that's going to carry on until they're, into their college and maybe even post-college years. So the big thing on a streamline kicking drill is that head needs to be buried in the water. Most kids will really have trouble putting their head that low, but that should be the goal, and the back should really kind of be flush with the back of the head there. As far as breathing goes, for this I just have the kids breathe up in front and then go back to the streamline, just whenever they need to go up and come back, because really even when we're swimming freestyle, we're going to be breathing, and you have to you're going to be out of the streamlined position a little bit during the stroke, but the goal is to return to this, right? We want to return to a baseline, and I don't want to overwhelm kids with focusing on breathing to the side just yet. Right now, the only goal is to put your eyes straight down, head buried. If you tell them you should feel like the entire pool is on top of your head, then you're doing it right. After mastering the streamline kick, we're going to move on to a single arm streamline kick, and always start out, push off the wall in a streamline. No matter what drill, no matter what stroke, no matter what you're doing, always practice that streamlined position. And then, as you'll notice here, as we transition from full streamline to just one arm streamline kick, the head should stay in exactly the same place. It shouldn't move at all. Eye should be looking straight down. This arm in front should stay in the exact same place. Try as best you can to have it stick next to the ear and not let it wander off back and forth. Kids will like to do that. And at first, I would recommend practicing this drill kind of flat on your stomach, or have the kids be flat on their stomach. And then as they progress and get better, and here I do it a little bit later, you can start having them kind of roll onto their side and keep one shoulder out of the water, just like that. Because really, as they grow up and they get better, we want to teach them to swim on their side. But at first, when kids are kind of young and weak with their kick, it's really hard for them to do both of those at the same time. So I usually try to do things first on the stomach, and then as the season progresses, we start doing it more on our side. And that way it changes the drill a little bit, and they don't feel like they're redoing the same thing for 6 months straight. The other thing to really practice at this stage is now we can start adding in the breathing and practice breathing. And the big thing is just to stay low, which I don't do a great job here. I'd like to keep one goggle in the water, but number one, you want to stay low, and I even tell the kids to press their head down into the water, because obviously a lot of them want to come up, and that's kind of instinctual. It's built into our hardware that we want to put our head as high above the water surface as possible, and naturally competitive swimming is the opposite of instinctual, so we have to always fight those urges. But one of the things I've found works is telling kids to really, as they breathe, you want to dig your ear down into the water, and that helps them stay a little bit low. And then, of course, we always want to return to as much of a streamlined position as possible after we breathe.
Just real quick before moving on, I think it's a really good idea to turn these drills into your regular kick sets instead of having kick sets with a board where all you're working on is conditioning the legs. I think you can pull double duty and have the kids do like sprint one-arm streamline kicking or sprint full streamline kicking. And this way they're working on their head position, breathing, and all while getting a good leg workout in.
So this is called the 6 and roll, and basically it's just the next step in the progression. I know there's a bit of glare there you can't see, but start in a streamline, then progress to one arm kicking right there, and then every 6 kicks or so switch the arms to the other side. I think this is pretty popular, pretty common drill. I really like it because it's essentially slow motion freestyle with a pause in the middle. Ideally, we don't want this hand to be down here by the hips. Some people will say you shouldn't be doing 6 and roll at all because of this position, but I think the benefits outweigh the costs. So again, make sure that the kids understand that your head stays in that streamlined position, the arm stays in a streamlined position, and when you make that switch, you want to switch from streamline to streamline. And other than that, we're not focusing on a whole lot. This is still mostly a streamlined head position drill. Now, as far as the breathing goes, I think it's okay to kind of swing into a breath, not like that. So like this one, swing into that breath and then come back down. But sometimes kids will really struggle with timing of things and they'll get kind of real awkward. So sometimes I'll have them split everything up, so kind of like how this first breath was. So come to your streamlined position, take a few kicks, breathe, come back to the streamline, and then make the switch instead of trying to do it all together. And occasionally that helps, but at the end of the day, really all we want to do is just have the kids really slow down, take their time, focus on getting their arm and their head in the right position with every stroke.
Of course, I used 6 as a number most of the time, but if your kids are rushing things or you want to change this number, of course you can. This is just arbitrary. The goal here is just to have that pause in the middle.
Now we're going to start getting into the real tough drills. So this one is called triangle drill, and specifically we're going to hold it. So some people call it shark fin, because you kind of make this shark fin with your arm. And the idea here is we're focusing on a high elbow recovery. And you can do this two ways, and I'll show you the next one. You can either hold it and not switch sides, or you can switch every 6 kicks, kind of like 6 and roll. But the big thing here, we're always progressing, so we're building on what we already have. Head down in streamline, arm in front. Now we're keeping the elbows high, and we want to keep the elbows pointed up. Super difficult drill to do without fins. So usually with the kids, if I have them purely kicking, I use this as kind of an alternative to just board kicking, and we'll usually do it with fins. Or if we do it without fins, it'll be like a sprint kick set. So I tell the kids, this is not a drill, this is a sprint. So you just want to sprint and hold that position. And just coming back to the note of kicking instead of using the board, I think for a lot of the board kicking for me is a way to get your muscles stronger, and a way to improve their performance. And that's not really my goal with a bunch of 6, 7, 8-year-olds. 6, 7, 8-year-olds, I really want to work their technique every chance I get. So if I can get them to do kicking drills where they're focusing on their technique and working their legs at the same time, I'd rather do that than just have them grab a board and go back and forth mindlessly. So I'd especially focus on drills like this and single arm, side kicking to get the kids better at that stuff. So here's that triangle switch drill. So we come up to the same triangle position, and then every 6 kicks switch sides. So just like 6 and roll, but keeping the elbows nice and high up above our head. And you don't have to do all these drills all the time. So for instance, you could spend a month just working on 6 and roll and a couple other drills, focusing on head position and breathing. And then once they get good and a little kind of bored with that drill, you can progress them out of 6 and roll and into triangle drill and, for a change. This is a really similar drill to triangle drill. This is called finger drag, very popular. I kind of went away from it and just started focusing on finger drag, but I would maybe just use one or the other. And the idea with finger drag is, if we slow things down here, you should drag the tips of your finger through the water. The big thing here, if I was going to use this drill, is not so much for high elbow, because you're going to force the high elbow anyway with fingertip drag, but really the kids should drag their finger right next to your ear and your head. Even I tend to go just a touch wide, but not too bad. The reason is you'll see a lot of kids who like to whip their arms around like that, and I don't think that's the best technique. I don't think anybody really at the elite level does that. One way, even if they're high elbow or if they're straight arm, they're staying in line and coming straight forward and not around. And I think this is what this drill can help with. It forces you to kind of slow motion, keep the fingers next to your head, and push them in front of you. So this is almost an arm entry, arm recovery drill rather than a high elbow drill. And it's kind of optional. Throw it in there every once in a while when things are starting to get stale. The last drill in the progression is almost true freestyle. This is the classic catch-up drill, and the idea is you want your fingers to catch up to each other before you start the next stroke. Some people have the kids, like, actually, I'll have the kids tap their hand, kind of tag next hand goes into the next stroke. And really what this does is, now we're pausing the freestyle back into that streamlined position, rather than, 6 and roll or triangle drill like we were doing before. And it really forces kids to stay long, because as you'll notice, especially when kids want to breathe, they'll push this arm will push down. And if you think about it, that makes complete sense, because when you go to breathe, your head has to come up a little bit. Even I come up even too much here a little bit. But in order to get the head to go up, if you don't have enough forward momentum, you have to push something down. That's what's that? One of Newton's laws, equal and opposite reactions. If you want something to go up, you have to push something else down. So kids will tend to do that with this bottom arm, and they get out of alignment and they get out of streamline. So catch-up really forces them to stay long and stay in front and keep their stroke in front. I always like to tell my kids that if they can learn how to do catch-up well, people have won Olympic gold medals swimming just pure catch-up, at least in the distance events. So I try to get them to swim this one as much as possible. We'll even do sprint sets where they have to drill catch-up or triangle drill or something. So it's not just for... Don't be afraid to use drills in sprint sets and make them sprint drills. I think it's super useful. Actually, I've made kids race this way, and I think it works really well.
Before talking about the advanced drills in freestyle, just wanted to make a note. Like, a lot of the drills that we talked about are really, you want to use them as tools to help kids fix their technique. A lot of times a swim lesson, you can do swim lessons and take videos and show them what they're doing wrong, and that can be super helpful. But a lot of times things don't carry over into a race unless it's practiced very diligently and very often. And you can't do that with one 30-minute swim lesson. You have to do it every day at practice. So if there's a specific focus or specific thing that kids struggle with, let's say high elbows, right? They don't keep their elbows high, they swing their arm around. You need to make them every day focus on doing triangle drill, for instance, or even the fingertip drag, and try to get them to drill it so much that that becomes their normal stroke. So don't be afraid to use, or I would recommend using drills as tools towards fixing people's strokes. Okay, so now let's move on to some advanced drills. Just a note for advanced drills, and this is going to apply across all the different strokes that we're going to talk about later in the series. These are not for everyday use. These are just kind of for really specific instances or for specific people. So just like we said earlier, these are tools to help people fix their stroke. These are certain tools, and the reason is these are potentially very damaging. They cost something in some way, or they risk teaching bad technique. They can be helpful and they can be very powerful, helping a swimmer kind of figure out how to swim more correctly. But at the same time, they kind of, if you're not really diligent as a coach and you're not on top of the kids' techniques all the time and really monitoring, the kids can kind of self-worsen their technique, I guess. And a lot of times if I use them, I'll use them with big kids, like new high schoolers, or a high schooler, a junior goes out for high school season. All of a sudden they've never really swam before. I'll take bigger risks on somebody like that rather than like an 8-year-old who I'm worried about their swimming career for the next 10 years. So for freestyle, the big concepts that we're going to hit on in these advanced drills are the S pattern pull, early vertical forearm. I know this probably a lot of coaches right now are thinking that should be a real basic idea. I agree. It is extremely important to teach at a young age, but it's very difficult. And for young kids, I'd rather get this in a different way when they're younger. So instead of really teaching them how to get their forearms vertical, I'd rather focus on distance per stroke, like counting their strokes. Like doing 25s and they have to hit 14 strokes to get across the pool. And that way I'm not like explicitly telling them to get their forearms vertical. Instead, I'm kind of subconsciously telling them how to improve their stroke, and I let their bodies self-program the way they move through the water. So this is more for like later in development where you want to work on it more specifically. Arm entry, we'll take another look at that, and then I think sprint strokes, I think you can have different strokes for different events, and I think you can train them separately. So for older kids, high schoolers and above, you can even drill sprinting and focus on that separately.
So here's the first kind of advanced drill, something I would save for older swimmers or way later in the season. This is just simply single arm freestyle, and I'll just play it here for a little bit. The idea is one arm stays in a streamline, and then you just swim with one arm. Now here's where the difficult part of this drill comes in. Most kids just rush and they just take stroke after stroke after stroke, and they don't really think and slow down about what they're doing. And really, probably the most difficult part, and even I struggle to do this, is this arm, you don't want to just plop it in and push back. It needs to go in, and then you have to rotate everything around and really reach out before you start pulling back. And it's a really difficult maneuver to do. And when we're doing this drill, the idea is we want to focus on really long pulls and working on that S pattern under the water. It's kind of difficult to see, but if you can imagine this arm kind of, if we were looking from a top-down view, this arm kind of goes a little bit out and then in and then out like that. And the reason we do that is because it helps us with timing. It gives the stroke a little bit longer. It gives us a longer stroke. If you look at the numbers, the force production doesn't go down that much, but the length of the stroke goes up so much that you actually get a lot more energy deposit into the water, basically, so you can go further with every stroke. The danger behind this stroke, obviously, especially in little kids, is they can S too much, and they essentially turn into sculling, where you're not going anywhere, and the arm's just going back and forth. And then, as I mentioned earlier, most of the time kids just don't take their time with it. They don't reach with the arm that's supposed to be swimming. They just kind of take one stroke after another, just trying to get across the pool as fast as they can. So this is something I use with very specific groups, or maybe high schoolers who didn't start out at a young age. Usually if you start swimming at a young enough age, your arms kind of learn how to grip the water and take long strokes to begin with. So really this is a natural way of learning to swim. But if you're older and you're getting started later, this can be something that you might need to focus in on and work on specifically, and that's what you would use single arm freestyle for.
Really, the big fear I have with this drill is that kids will learn to S way too much, and then it turns into sculling, and then and they won't go anywhere, obviously. The second thing I wanted to point out, I didn't mention in the video, is that this S pattern is very person and very event specific. So in the 50 freestyle, where we want to focus more on tempo, you almost want to have a very thin, if not like non-existent S. Whereas if you're doing the mile or the 500, something where you want as much distance per stroke, that S becomes a little more prominent. And if you have a really conscientious swimmer, they can almost control this based on what event they're going to do. But most swimmers are not like that, so really they end up doing one or the other. And even at the elite level, things can be very highly variable. If you look at Sarah Sjogren, probably didn't say that right, but the butterflyer, the way she swims butterfly underwater, she's a complete straight. She anchors and pulls straight back. whereas somebody like Michael Phelps had a pretty big S pattern in his butterfly. So it just depends, and that's kind of why this is in the advanced group.
This advanced drill is a fist drill. I think it's pretty popular. A lot of people use it. Essentially, you just close your arm, your fist, hands up. Can't talk right now. And the goal is to really swim with your forearms and work on that high elbow catch. Let's see if I do a good job here. Kind of. It's difficult to see off to the side there, but we want to use keep our elbows high and use our forearms to do most of the work of pushing us forward. The reason I put this in the advanced section is because I think distance per stroke and swimming with your forearm is better taught with other uses, like counting your strokes, for instance, challenging the kids to make their strokes longer in a different way. Fist drill, because you're closing up the hands and they're slipping through the water faster than normal, it can kind of make the timing of the stroke a little awkward and change it up a little bit. So that's kind of why I don't use it very much. But overall, you know, in the right context, I think it's a really good one, especially if you go back and forth from having your hands closed to having them open, so the kids can really gain awareness of how much their hands and how much their forearms help them swim. Okay, this one is called Tarzan drill, so essentially push off, and then for the first half of the pool you're going to keep your head up and keep the head straight. Don't let it bob around back and forth with every stroke. And the idea here is you do a couple things. You can watch your arms enter the water, so you can make sure you have a good arm entry right in front, not out to the sides, not crossing over, anything like that. So this is really good for kids who tend to cross over or swim a little too wide. And then about halfway down the pool, you're going to put your head down and try to maintain the same arm entry. The reason this is an advanced drill and it has some negatives to it is you're obviously, for the first half, you're not putting your head in the proper like streamlined position, so we're kind of building a touch of bad habits with it. But you could also turn it into a drill where that's where the focus is, where you make the kids work really hard at the beginning because their head's so high and their legs are so deep, and then you have them try to focus on feeling how the whole body floats back to the surface, including the legs, as they put their head down. So maybe just another one to play around with.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have noticed in these videos, but you know, in my technique, my right arm tends to cross over just a little bit. So this, I should probably do more of this drill. This drill's for me. So there you go. Drills as tools to help fix technique. I should apply it to myself too, huh?
This one is not so much a drill, but more of just a different way of swimming. This is just straight arm freestyle, and this is mostly for sprint freestyle, right? And as kids get older, they may, you might want to develop a couple different varieties of their freestyle. They might have a high elbow variety for long distance, like 200 events, 100 event, and then for shorter distances, like 50 and such, you may want to experiment with straight arm freestyle. Now, the trick with straight arm freestyle is you almost go to a backstroke or a windmill pattern, so the arms are almost completely opposite each other. As they recover, they are straight, but notice they're not straight around like butterfly, they're straight up and they come down. It's a really difficult technique to master, and really it should be done without breathing at all. Once you start breathing with this, things kind of get a little messy. You can see it even in my stroke here. So these first couple strokes without breathing, because you want to get the shoulder up out of the water, and it becomes harder once you start breathing and the timing gets off. But the idea is we reach as far out in front of us as we can And even though it's a sprint stroke, I like to get my swimmers to still rotate side to side, because a lot of the power comes from rotating. So you put the arm into the water. Let's come back here maybe a little bit. So the arm comes around, it gets into the water, and even now there's still a split second forward motion, and you anchor the arm and really use the hips to rotate and pull through, and that's where the power comes from. If you just try to use your arms, if you try to stay flat and use your arms, it's kind of like doing pull-ups without using your legs. It's a lot more difficult. But if you use your whole body, your hips and your legs, to connect your arms and your legs, I think it can be a much more powerful stroke. So maybe just something else to fiddle with later on in the season or with older kids.
So again, thanks for watching. Hope that's helpful and gives you some ideas on what to do with your kids and how to really progress them throughout the season. Again, just wanted to say, I don't, especially for younger, like 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, don't let them mindlessly swim. Don't just put up 300, swim, warm up, go. I would create a warm-up around all these drills. I would create sets around all these drills. We're going to do 225s, 6 in a row, 250s, triangle drill, 2 100s, catch up. That way they're focusing every piece, every line of that has a focus to it, right? Head position, streamline arms, high elbow recovery, distance per stroke. And you can mix and match however you want and progress it however you want over the season, but I would really challenge you as a coach, if you're watching this, to do something like that. It takes a lot of time to put together workouts that are like that, because it's a lot more difficult when you have to think through what your goal is and how you're going to get to that goal. But it is a lot more beneficial, and the kids will like workouts a lot more. Even they might whine a little bit at the beginning, but they will find workouts to be a lot more interesting rather than boring. So good luck, and if you have any feedback, would love to hear it. Thanks for watching.